Hey everyone, get ready because we've got Al and Lisa Robertson here, a couple who's been married for 38 years and has spent decades in ministry. They've seen it all, the highs, the lows, and everything in between, and they're all about marriage, grace, and redemption. Today, we're diving into their real-life stories, the lessons they've learned, and their honest take on relationships. It's not formal, it's not perfect, it's just genuine insights you can really relate to, and I can't wait for you to hear it. So, let's dig into some of the advice Al and Lisa Robertson shared for singles and young adults. And honestly, it's really practical stuff. You know, they start off by pointing out something that kind of makes sense, but we don't always think about learning from other people's experiences. Like, we often hear the phrase, experience is the best teacher, right? But Lisa flips it a little and says, actually, someone else's experience is even better. That way, you get to see what worked and what didn't without having to stumble through it yourself. And that's huge, because when you're young and single, there's a lot to figure out. Al and Lisa really emphasize that this time before marriage isn't just a waiting period, it's an opportunity. It's a chance to work on yourself, your own relationship with God, and to grow into the kind of person who can have a healthy, lasting relationship later on. And there's a little honesty in what they say about marrying young. They married at 18 and 19, which, is young by any standard. And while they say they wouldn't change it because growing together was meaningful, they also point out that waiting a bit longer can give you more life experience, a stronger sense of independence, and a chance to really develop spiritually before bringing someone else into the mix. That's not to say young marriage can't work, but they're just being real about the benefits of maturity. Another key point they make is about understanding what you're looking for in a spouse. And this is where I think a lot of young people get tripped up. It's easy to focus on surface level things, looks, charm, or whatever, but Al and Lisa emphasize that you need to know the deeper qualities, the values, the kind of character traits that matter for a lifelong partnership. It's not about hoping someone will magically change after you marry them. That's actually one of their main warnings. Don't go into a relationship thinking, I can fix them or they'll be different once we're married. The real change comes from within each person through their own relationship with God. And that's a really important distinction, right? Because when you understand that, it shapes how you approach dating and relationships. You start looking for someone whose values align with yours, someone who's equally yoked spiritually, emotionally, and morally. And it's not about perfection, it's about compatibility at the core level, the foundation for a strong relationship. They also talk a lot about prayer in this stage of life. Lisa mentions praying early, even before dating seriously, for God to send the right person. It's not about controlling the outcome or trying to manipulate your future spouse into existence. It's about seeking God's guidance and trusting Him to bring the right person into your life at the right time. That's a perspective that's both hopeful and practical because it keeps your focus on what really matters rather than just chasing temporary feelings or trends. And there's something really cool about how they frame friendship as the foundation of a relationship. Before romance, before dating, they suggest that being friends first is key. It creates trust, understanding, and a real connection that can carry a marriage through the tough times. Think about it if you're already friends with someone. You know their character, you know how they handle challenges, and you've built a foundation of respect and trust. That's priceless for a lasting partnership. Another thing they touch on is growth, both individual and spiritual. They stress that the single years are prime for personal development, for deepening your walk with Christ, and for becoming the kind of person who can give and receive love in a healthy way. There's this beautiful idea that you can't fully bring someone else into your life if you haven't done the work on yourself first. And it's not just about fixing flaws, it's about understanding yourself, your strengths, your weaknesses, and letting God shape you into someone ready for a lifelong relationship. There's a kind of humility in that advice too. It's like saying, don't rush, don't force things, and don't expect marriage to solve your own growth gaps. Instead, use the time wisely. And there's a lot of encouragement in that. Al and Lisa also share some perspective on marrying young versus waiting. They grew up together and learned together, and they see the beauty in that, but they also acknowledge that having some life experience before marriage can be beneficial. It's about balance. You want to be mature enough to handle the realities of marriage, but you also want to be open and flexible enough to grow together when the time comes. And their emphasis on discernment is key. Know what you value in a spouse. Know what matters to you, and don't compromise on the fundamentals, especially when it comes to faith, integrity, and character. Those are the things that hold up over decades, not just the initial spark of attraction or infatuation. And the way they talk about all of this is so human and relatable. They don't come off like preachers lecturing from a podium. It's more like friends giving honest advice, sharing from their own experience, and acknowledging that life isn't perfect. That honesty is so refreshing because it makes the guidance feel practical and achievable, not intimidating or unattainable. They also touch on the reality of struggles and mistakes, and how those can actually become learning experiences. The Thessalonians part of their discussion might not directly connect here, but the principle is similar: learn from others, be open to God's guidance, and approach relationships with intention and humility. And there's a repeated theme that I love: growth before marriage isn't just about avoiding mistakes. It's about being ready to build something lasting. It's about entering marriage as a person who can give, receive, forgive, and grow with another person. That's a mindset that can make a huge difference, because it shifts focus from just finding someone to complete you to becoming the right partner yourself. And finally, they really emphasize that there's no rush. God's timing matters. You don't need to check off a list by a certain age or follow some cultural timetable. What matters is that you're prepared spiritually and emotionally, and that you're seeking God's guidance throughout the process. So, in short, the Robertsons' advice to singles and young adults is rich and layered. Learn from others' experiences, grow personally and spiritually, know what qualities matter in a spouse. Be friends first, pray early and often. Trust God's timing, and don't expect to change anyone focused on becoming the person God wants you to be. It's practical, it's relatable, and it's deeply encouraging. And when you put these principles into practice, it really does set the stage for a healthy, thriving marriage. It's the kind of advice that's not just theory, it's grounded in decades of real-life experience, the highs and lows of life together, and a deep faith that God guides and sustains relationships when we let Him. Alright, let's get into one of the big points Al makes about relationships being equally yoked. Now, when he talks about this, he's not just dropping a Bible phrase and moving on. He's really emphasizing that if you go into a relationship thinking you can fix or change someone after marriage, you're in for a rough ride. Al points out that true change happens between a person and God, not because you tie the knot. Marriage won't magically transform bad habits, character flaws, or spiritual immaturity. In fact, sometimes it makes them even more obvious, because now you're living together, making decisions together, and dealing with pressure as a unit. So, his advice is clear: look for someone who shares your faith, your values, and your commitment to God. That's what being equally yoked is about. It's not perfection, but alignment on the essentials, the foundation that makes a relationship sustainable and meaningful. And here's the part that hits home: don't put a timetable on God. Don't stress that you need to meet someone by a certain age. Al says just let it unfold as God intends. He shares that he personally had a moment where he prayed about the girl he loved, asking God to help him, and then trusted God to guide the timing and the path of their relationship. It's a mix of knowing what you want, committing that to God, and then letting Him handle the timing. You can't force it, and trying to will only lead to frustration and disappointment. And Lisa adds this really practical layer to the conversation. She talks about starting to pray early, even before you're actively dating or looking for a spouse. It's not about scripting your future or trying to manipulate outcomes. It's about inviting God into the process from the very beginning, asking Him to prepare your heart and to bring the right person at the right time. And then she ties it to friendship, which I think is brilliant. She emphasizes that any lasting relationship, any healthy marriage has to be built on friendship first. You need to know someone as a person to see how they handle life, to understand their character, their values, their quirks. If you jump straight into romance without that foundation, it's a bit like building a house on sand. It might stand for a while, but when the storms come, it won't hold. So Lisa's point is, start with friendship, let it grow naturally, and watch how the relationship develops. That friendship becomes the glue for everything else. And it's not just about comfort or fun, it's about trust, respect, and mutual understanding, which are critical when challenges arise. Al and Lisa both recognize that this takes patience. There's no quick route, no shortcut, and trying to rush can lead to decisions you might regret. Being equally yoked isn't about checking off boxes or finding someone who looks perfect on the surface. It's about alignment in faith, values, and the way you approach life together. And starting to pray early reinforces that alignment because you're keeping God at the center from day one. Another thing that comes through in their advice is the idea of intentionality. You're not just waiting around for someone to appear magically. You're actively preparing yourself spiritually and emotionally. You're learning, growing, and seeking God's guidance every step of the way. And when the right person comes along, you're ready, not just for the romance, but for a partnership grounded in shared faith, friendship, and purpose. It's a really refreshing perspective because it removes a lot of the pressure and the guesswork. Instead of obsessing over the question, is this the one, or trying to manipulate situations, you focus on becoming the right person yourself and trusting God to bring the right person into your life. And the beauty of this approach is that it sets a tone of patience, trust, and discernment. You're not just looking for someone to fill a void, you're seeking a partner to walk alongside you, someone whose heart and values are aligned with yours, whose character you respect, and whose faith complements your own. And when you combine that with friendship, prayer, and a reliance on God's timing, you create a relationship that's not just about temporary feelings, but about long-term resilience and growth. So, in essence, Al and Lisa's advice can be summed up like this focus on being equally yoked. Trust God to guide timing. Don't try to change anyone. Start praying early and build a foundation of friendship. It's about preparation, patience, and partnership in the truest sense. And the way they share it honestly, casually, with real-life examples and reflections makes it feel so relatable. It's not a lecture. It's like sitting down with friends who've been through it all and are offering the wisdom they've learned. And if we take it to heart, it can completely change how we approach relationships, helping us avoid common pitfalls and build something lasting and meaningful, grounded in faith, friendship, and mutual respect. Now, one of the things that really stands out about Al and Lisa Robertson is their openness about both the struggles and victories in their marriage. I mean, this is a couple who hasn't tried to sugarcoat life, and that honesty is something you can feel immediately when you hear them talk. Growing up, they were part of a family where authenticity was the norm. They didn't grow up seeing only the polished, perfect version of life. They saw real people, real mistakes, and real grace in action, and that shaped the way they approach marriage and storytelling. And you can see that same authenticity come through in how they share their own marriage journey. They talk about hard times, the conflicts, the mistakes, the misunderstandings, but also the triumphs, the ways they've grown together, and the moments where God's grace has been so evident. What's remarkable is how they tie transparency to healing. They don't just share their story to look good or to inspire. They share it because speaking openly about pain, mistakes, and struggles actually has a healing effect for them as well as for others. Lisa explains that whenever they share, it peels back another layer, like removing a scab to reveal growth underneath. And that's powerful, because it reminds us that healing doesn't come from hiding or pretending. It comes from honesty, from facing the truth, and from giving ourselves permission to let others see our real lives. Their movie, The Blind, is a really vivid example of this. Watching the trailer or scenes can bring out strong emotions, even for them. Al recalls a moment as a 9-year-old when something traumatic happened in his family, and seeing it reenacted in the movie brought all those emotions right back. And it's raw. It's real. That's exactly the point by being vulnerable about their experiences. They connect with others on a deep human level. Lord, people see that they're not perfect, that they have gone through difficulties, and that grace and forgiveness are part of the journey, and that relatability is huge. When viewers or audiences hear their story, they're reminded that struggles are normal and that there's hope and healing available. It's not a polished, untouchable narrative, it's life, lived with honesty and faith. And this kind of openness doesn't just benefit outsiders, it benefits them too. Sharing their experiences reinforces the lessons they've learned, reminds them of God's work in their lives, and strengthens their own bond as a couple. There's a kind of cycle where vulnerability leads to reflection, reflection leads to healing, and healing leads to a deeper ability to help and inspire others. And that extends beyond marriage too. Their transparency helps families, kids, and even their wider audience recognize that struggles aren't something to hide, and that working through them with faith can create resilience. Lisa shares moments where people have told them that hearing their story opened the door for them to be honest about their own struggles, which is just incredible. It's the ripple effect of authenticity and grace. And it's also worth noting that their approach to storytelling is very human. They don't just present events, they convey the emotions, the challenges, the awkwardness, and the victories. It's a mix of reflection, humor, vulnerability, and faith that makes it so relatable. When they talk about a difficult night in their past, a misunderstanding, or even an emotional moment from their upbringing, it's not just about the story itself, it's about the feeling, the growth, and the way God's hand was at work. And they're honest about the fact that healing and growth take time. It's not instant, it's ongoing. But by being open and talking about it, they're modeling a process that viewers can see and learn from. And it resonates, because everyone has challenges, whether it's in marriage, family, or personal life. Seeing someone else navigate them with honesty and faith is encouraging and empowering. There's also something really touching about how they connect their personal story to helping others. Every time they speak, sign books, or appear in a film, they're not just telling their own story, they're giving others permission to reflect on theirs, to face struggles, and to accept grace. That combination of storytelling, emotional honesty, and faith creates a space where people can feel seen, understood, and inspired. And that's the heart of why they do what they do. It's not about fame or recognition. It's about helping others recognize that even messy, imperfect lives are met with grace, redemption, and the possibility of healing. And their approach is so grounded, so real, that it doesn't feel like preaching. It feels like listening to friends who have been through it and can genuinely empathize. And that, honestly, is what makes their message hit so hard. It's personal, it's authentic, and it's reflective of a life lived with faith and honesty. By sharing both the victories and the struggles, Al and Lisa show that transparency is not just a storytelling tool, it's a path to healing, growth, and deeper connection with both each other and the people around them. And that's something anyone watching can take to heart. Be open, be honest, share your story, and let grace do the rest, okay? So let's talk about Lisa's journey, because it's honestly one of the most moving parts of their story. Lisa has been incredibly open about some really difficult moments in her life, things like having an abortion as a teenager, and later going through an affair, and how those experiences brought a lot of guilt and shame. But what's really powerful is the way she describes receiving grace and forgiveness, and how central understanding Christ's forgiveness was in the whole process. She talks about how, at first, it was almost overwhelming to confront these mistakes, to see them for what they really were, and to acknowledge them honestly. You know, it's one thing to recognize something was wrong, but it's another to truly face it, to verbalize it, and to let yourself feel the weight of it. And Lisa points out that this was essential. She had to see herself, really see herself, and recognize what had happened in her life before she could accept forgiveness. It wasn't about ignoring the past or pretending it didn't happen. It was about being honest, confessing it openly, and bringing it before God. And that's where Christ's forgiveness comes in. Lisa explains that Jesus took all of those sins to the cross, the abortion, the affairs, the lies, the mistakes, and that understanding this truth was the turning point. She emphasizes that when you grasp that Christ has already paid the penalty, that he bore the weight of shame and guilt, it becomes possible to accept his forgiveness. And once you have that, you can begin to forgive yourself. That's key, because so often we think we need to forgive ourselves first, or we get stuck in cycles of guilt. But Lisa highlights that you can't truly forgive yourself until you've received God's forgiveness. And that's freeing in a way that's hard to put into words. She also talks about the practical side of this. Reading scripture, praying, meditating on passages like Psalms and Proverbs really helped her internalize God's promises and mercy. It wasn't instant. It took time, reflection, and effort. But each step brought more clarity and peace, more assurance that she was truly forgiven and loved. And what's beautiful is that Lisa doesn't stop there. She extends that lesson to the way we deal with others and our past. Forgiving other people is a huge part of healthy relationships and emotional freedom, she says. And it doesn't mean you forget what happened or that you ignore hurt. It means you're no longer holding on to it in a way that controls your life. She shares how important it is to understand the difference between regret and shame. Regret is natural. It reminds us that we did something wrong and can guide us to make better choices. But shame is destructive. It's the lie that says we're unworthy or that we're defined by our mistakes. And Lisa stresses that God's forgiveness removes shame. We can still carry regret as a reminder to grow and learn, but shame should no longer hold sway over our hearts. And the way she tells it, it's so relatable because she's speaking from experience, from a place of empathy and warmth. It's like listening to a friend who's been through the fire and come out stronger, offering guidance without judgment. Another part of Lisa's journey that stands out is how openness and transparency played a role. Sharing her story wasn't just about teaching others, it was also part of her own healing process. Speaking the truth, naming the mistakes, and acknowledging the emotions tied to them helped her process the pain and receive God's grace more fully. And this isn't just theory. She shares examples from her life where God's forgiveness brought tangible freedom from guilt, from secrecy, from the fear of judgment. And it's transformative, not just emotionally, but spiritually and relationally as well. She also emphasizes the ripple effect. By receiving God's grace and forgiveness, she can then offer grace to others. It's like a chain reaction. Once you experience forgiveness authentically, you start to extend it naturally, whether in family, friendships, or even larger ministry work. And the storytelling here is so human, right? Lisa talks about real feelings, the shame, the self-doubt, the pain, but she also shares the hope and healing that come through Christ. She talks about reading Psalm 51, praying for purification, and internalizing God's mercy, which makes it all feel so accessible. It's not some lofty theological concept, it's practical, lived experience. And she connects this to family too. She talks about conversations with their granddaughter, who's navigating teenage struggles, and how having a model of grace, forgiveness, and transparency in the family creates trust. The kids see that mistakes don't disqualify you from love, guidance, or relationship with God. And that's a powerful takeaway for anyone watching. The other thing that comes through is the ongoing nature of this process. Forgiveness, both receiving and giving, isn't a one-time event. It's a daily practice, a choice to release shame, accept God's mercy, and extend that mercy to others. Lisa and Al both emphasize that living under grace doesn't mean ignoring consequences or responsibility. It means walking free from the paralyzing weight of shame, fully embracing God's transformative power. And the conversational way Lisa shares this pausing, reflecting, reacting, and honestly recounting the emotions makes it feel so real. It's not a lecture, it's storytelling, full of empathy, authenticity, and warmth. And by doing so, she shows that God's forgiveness is accessible, that healing is possible, and that grace isn't just a concept, it's a living, breathing experience that can reshape your life. So, Lisa's journey is all about stepping into honesty, acknowledging mistakes, embracing Christ's forgiveness, and learning to let go of shame while holding on to healthy regret. It's about understanding that forgiveness, both given and received, is central to emotional and spiritual health. And through it all, she models how grace transforms not just the individual, but relationships, families, and communities. And listening to her story, you can't help but feel inspired and encouraged to let God's mercy into your own life, to start forgiving yourself, and to extend that same grace to the people around you. Alright, let's dive into Al and Lisa Robertson's take on forgiveness in marriage. Because honestly, it's some of the most practical and heart-level advice you can get. They talk a lot about how essential it is to not only forgive your spouse, but also to accept forgiveness when it's offered. And it's not just a one-and-done kind of thing, it's a process, a daily choice to release past offenses and stop holding on to grudges. Al shares this really vivid metaphor from Corrie ten Boom about forgiveness being like a bell in a church steeple. You pull the rope to ring the bell, right? But even after you let go, the sound still carries for a while. That's what forgiveness is like. When you let go of an offense, you don't have to keep pulling on that rope, adding weight to the issue, but the impact or memory might linger a bit. The key is that you're no longer holding it in a way that controls your heart or your marriage. And they're really clear that forgiveness isn't about pretending the offense didn't happen or ignoring pain. It's about intentionally deciding not to let the hurt define the relationship moving forward. That takes humility and courage, especially in situations where there's been betrayal or hurt that runs deep. Another thing they point out is the difference between regret and shame. They make a really important distinction. Regret can stay. It's natural to feel remorse for mistakes, but shame should be released. Shame is destructive. It tells you that you're unworthy, that your mistakes define you. Al and Lisa emphasize that God's forgiveness removes shame. You can hold on to regret as a guide to grow and make better choices, but shame should not dictate your heart or your actions, and they tie this to their own marriage experiences. They face challenges that could have easily caused resentment or bitterness, but by extending and accepting forgiveness, they've been able to move forward together. It's not always easy, and it doesn't happen overnight, but they model how it can strengthen a relationship rather than weaken it. Transparency plays a role here too. By being open with each other about struggles and mistakes, they create a safe space where forgiveness can actually happen. Lisa mentions how some past things in her life had to be forgiven even if the other person wasn't around or had passed away, and that releasing those offenses lifted a heavy burden. And that's something that resonates for anyone listening, because forgiveness isn't just about the other person, it's about freeing yourself from the weight of past pain. Al also talks about how offenses can become sources of repeated pain if forgiveness isn't fully extended or accepted. If you don't truly accept forgiveness, the old hurt continues to fester and influence your interactions. That's where couples can get stuck in cycles of blame and resentment, and it takes intentionality to break that cycle. They emphasize that forgiveness has to work both ways. When both partners extend and receive it authentically, it builds a foundation of trust and resilience that can weather the storms of marriage. And there's a really human quality in the way they share this advice. They use real-life examples, they pause, they reflect, and they don't pretend that forgiveness is easy. They acknowledge the pain, the mistakes, and the struggles, but they also highlight the joy and freedom that come when you release offenses and accept God's grace. They point out that even after decades of marriage, remembering past pain can serve a purpose. Al talks about continuing to hold on to regret, not to dwell in it, but to remind himself of the lessons learned and the mercy they've experienced. That regret helps him stay mindful, but it doesn't control him. Shame, on the other hand, is discarded because it has no place in a life built on God's grace. And what's striking is how they frame forgiveness not as a rule to follow, but as a pathway to emulate God's character. By forgiving like He forgives, they're not just repairing past wounds, they're actively creating a healthier, stronger, and more authentic relationship. It's about moving forward with intention, letting past mistakes inform growth without letting them define the marriage. The bell rope metaphor really brings it home because it's easy to visualize. You can still hear the sound, maybe the echo lingers, but you're no longer actively pulling. You're free from the constant weight and tension of unforgiveness. And the way they share all this so conversational, so honest, makes it feel approachable. It's like listening to a couple reflect openly over coffee, sharing wisdom from years of experience rather than being lectured at. They balance acknowledgement of pain with the beauty of grace and healing, showing that forgiveness in marriage isn't just necessary, it's transformative. And that's the takeaway: accept forgiveness when it's offered. Let go of past offenses. Understand the role of regret versus shame. And remember that forgiveness, while sometimes challenging, is a choice that brings freedom, healing, and a stronger bond. Al and Lisa make it clear that when you embrace forgiveness like this, your marriage isn't just surviving, it's thriving, rooted in trust, grace, and the lived experience of God's mercy. Alright, so as we wrap things up, Al and Lisa Robertson share some really exciting updates about their current projects and ministry. First off, their movie, The Blind, is coming out on September 28th, and it's a deeply personal project that reflects not only their family story, but also the themes of redemption, grace, and the power of faith in real-life struggles. They encourage viewers to check out the trailers and updates on the movie's website. And honestly, just watching it gives you a real sense of the heart behind their story. Beyond the movie, they've been incredibly active in ministry for decades, traveling, speaking, and connecting with families and couples to share what they've learned about relationships, marriage, and walking in faith. Their ministry is really grounded in authenticity, helping people see that even when life is messy, God's grace can transform it. They're passionate about encouraging marriages, showing that even after decades of challenges and growth, you can thrive together with love, forgiveness, and faith as the foundation. And before they close, Al offers a beautiful prayer for marriages and relationships, which is worth pausing for. He prays for everyone watching, asking God to bless them with hearts that prioritize Him, hearts that are willing to be transformed, and lives where Satan's influence is broken. He prays for forgiveness, for grace to be upon families, and for a pathway to peace in relationships that may be struggling or in need of guidance. It's heartfelt, personal, and full of warmth, and it really ties together all the lessons they've shared, from honesty and transparency to grace, forgiveness, and mutual respect. And here's the thing, listening to them is like sitting with friends who genuinely care about your well-being. They're not just giving advice for the sake of it, they've lived it, and they want to help others experience the same freedom and joy in relationships that they have. So as they sign off, it's not about grandiose instructions or lofty ideals. It's a gentle reminder to stay committed to your faith, to nurture your relationships, and to let God guide the timing and growth of your life and your marriage. And if you've been inspired by their story, their honesty, or just their heartfelt advice, it's great to keep following their work, whether through the movie, their ministry, or other projects they share. You don't have to do anything formal, just keep engaging. Keep reflecting on the lessons shared and allow them to shape the way you approach your own relationships. Their message is simple but profound: love well, forgive freely, walk in faith, and embrace the journey together. And with that, we can take a moment to appreciate everything they've shared, the vulnerability, the insights, and the encouragement. It's a reminder that real life, with all its struggles and triumphs, is made better when we approach it with honesty, grace, and trust in God. So, as we close, let's carry a bit of that warmth with us. Let their story inspire us to be kinder, more patient, and more faithful in our own lives and relationships. And if you enjoyed hearing their journey, learning from their experiences, or just feeling uplifted by their faith, consider following their updates or supporting their projects. There's a lot of value in staying connected with stories like theirs, because they remind us that even imperfect lives can reflect extraordinary grace. Al and Lisa's story, their prayer, and their encouragement leave a lasting impact, and it's a gentle nudge to keep faith, keep hope, and keep striving for love and understanding in all our relationships. That's the takeaway. Stay open to God's guidance, embrace forgiveness, nurture your relationships, and remember that grace is available to everyone, every step of the way. All right, that's a wrap. Today we've heard so much about grace, forgiveness, and what it takes to build strong, lasting relationships from Al and Lisa Robertson. Their story really reminds us that honesty, faith, and commitment can transform struggles into growth and joy. Take a moment to reflect on your own relationships and see where you can apply these lessons. If you found their insights inspiring, go ahead and give the video a like and consider subscribing for more stories like this. Thanks for watching.